Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. You know, recently, Curtis Stevens decided to change trainers just a few weeks before his fight against David Lemieux. Right? So he actually hired a superstar trainer, John David Jackson, the trainer of Sergey Kovalev, right? The trainer of Chris Algieri and others, right? Cuba Arias. Well, you know the rest. The bullets started flying. Curtis Stevens was in the ring with a knockout puncher. Stevens inexplicably against David Lemieux, a guy who's trying to get you up against the ropes. Stevens literally goes from the middle of the ring over to the side of the ring. Then, of course, he doesn't block a left hook that Lemieux throws. That's one of the most brutal knockout punches I've seen in my life. Make no mistake, Curtis Stevens' career has been shortened as a result of this knockout, right? If you had a friend in a car crash who looked like Curtis Stevens did after the KO, you'd be worried. Understand it was so bad. He was carried out of the ring on a stretcher. Now, the only point I'm trying to make in this video about the Canelo Chavez Jr. fight is that any of us can go out there and hire a superstar trainer. In this case, Nacho Beristain, right? That's who Chavez hired. But I'm just telling you that it takes years working with the trainer for a fighter to develop the skills and enhancements to their game that trainer brings, right? I can't show up and hire a superstar trainer today and expect to have all of the benefits of that superstar trainer's training in my next fight. You want another example? Andres Fonfara hired Virgil Hunter. He went in his fight against Chad Dawson. I made a video here online before the fight saying that Chad Dawson was a live underdog. Well, Dawson was winning on the scorecards when he gets stopped in the 10th round. Now, I have no doubt that over time, Andres Fonfara working with Virgil Hunter is going to improve parts of his game, right? But the first fight is always rocky. Now, I don't know what's going on out there in the world of boxing. I'm really lost on how some of the biggest names in the sport could actually be picking Chavez Jr. in this fight, right? The Chavez Jr. I've seen really can't be helped by anybody. I believe his game has been in decline for years, right? I personally feel it's over for him, right? So he signed on with Nacho Beristain, and somehow that has convinced Mikey Garcia, one of boxing's best, Erislandy Lara, who went the distance with Canelo in a fight I thought Lara won. We can debate it, right? Look at the scorecards, it's close. Carlos Cuadras, who I took Chocolatito in the first fight. If those two guys have a rematch, I'm just telling you, I'll be on the sidelines, right? Cuadras, to me, seemed to figure out Chocolatito, who was barely hanging on at the end of that fight. Well, understand, Lara, Garcia, and Cuadras are all taking Chavez Jr. against Canelo. Now, I don't get it. Right? I honestly don't get it. In my opinion, this fight's a mismatch. I'll concede Chavez Jr. is physically bigger than Canelo. right? He is. Also, I am a little bit concerned. Let's call people out here. Memo Heredia is supposed to be helping Chavez Jr. prepare for this fight from a nutritional standpoint. I'm concerned because understand this is a guy who, and I can say this, it's part of the public record, worked with law enforcement authorities, right, to bring down some people in track and field who were supplying their athletes with PEDs. And Heredia himself admitted that he had taken PEDs and that he had given PEDs to athletes. Well, now here he is in boxing. I understand he has a superstar client list, but let's be real here. While he was helping Lucien Boutte failed a drug test. Right? Let's just be blunt. Right? Let me repeat that. While Memo Heredia was helping Lucien Boutte failed a drug test. Now, if you can believe this, Twitter has many people on Twitter, including Memo Heredia and Victor Conte. Now, you might remember Victor Conte, Barry Bonds' Victor Conte, the head of Balco. Right? Victor Conte is also counseling people, athletes, including boxers. Now, these two guys have actually been having a dialogue on Twitter, at least they used to, where Victor Conte was very critical of Angel Heredia. Now, this fight has a component where Chavez Jr. has to lose weight to get down to 164.5, at least for the weigh-in. But he's going to rehydrate after the weigh-in. Let me also say this too. Years ago, and I believe it's highly relevant, you had Emanuel Stewart, right? This is the superstar Hall of Fame trainer who trained Thomas the Hitman Hearns, right? He's the patriarch of the Kronk Gym. Then he trains Lennox Lewis, right? Another heavyweight champion he trained, Vladimir Klitschko, right? He was in the corner of Andy Lee. Now, if there's one thing you should know about Andy Lee, it's that Andy Lee hits hard. Now, they were in Texas. Their opponent was Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Right? Now, of all the fights that Emanuel Stewart was involved in, and keep in mind, this is a guy who has been involved in more heavyweight fights than most. In other words, fights where the guys come in all cut up and stuff like that. Just logistically, right? I would say that since the heavyweight division doesn't have a weight limit, you would imagine, given the bodybuilding bills of some of these heavyweights over the years, that a guy like Emanuel Stewart would be around some guys who he might have suspected used PEDs. But yet I can tell you the only time I remember Emanuel Stewart raising the question of whether an opponent of one of his fighters used PEDs, right, being upset that there wasn't an agreed upon post-fight drug test. And understand, even if you win the fight, if there's something in the contract saying post-fight drug test, even if you're the winner, you would want the post-fight drug test, because you'd want people to know, look, I won this on the merits, right? I don't want people thinking that I won this by juicing. Well, Google this fight. Andy Lee comes out and looks great the first 2 rounds against Chavez Jr. Then, according to Emanuel Stewart, who picks his words carefully, right? Chavez Jr. was almost like the Hulk. Suddenly, he starts throwing big punches. Andy Lee who has been in some scraps, says he's never been hit like that before. Right? So you know the rest. Chavez Jr. wins the fight by KO. Right? Wins the fight by KO. So afterwards, Emanuel Stewart and Andy Lee were very interested in the results of the post-fight drug test. Folks, this was Texas. Texas is still a frontier state. Right? Somehow, with this fight, high profile, you would imagine it's one of the more important fights that have taken place that day in the state. Somehow, the Texas State Boxing Commission didn't have it together enough to actually administer a post-fight drug test. Right? Emanuel Stewart was so livid that he made some comments that you could Google here online. Right? So let me just say, given that Chavez Jr., according to his old trainer, Freddie Roach, barely showed up to train for a middleweight unification match against Sergio Martinez. Right? I'll just say this bluntly. Between him and Canelo, I believe Canelo is the more devoted, more disciplined person when it comes to preparation for boxing matches. Right? I believe Canelo is the guy who shows up at the gym early. He's ready to put in work. Right? I could not imagine Canelo missing post-fight drug tests. Right? I don't expect I'll ever hear Memo Heredia's name associated with Canelo's preparation for any boxing match. By contrast, I'm just not buying the hype on Chavez Jr. Right? This is a guy who has shown up for fights, to me, barely aware of who his opponent is. He's fighting Andres Fonfara. I encourage people to go back and look at that tape. It's as if he didn't know he was fighting a guy who was fluid, who was going to throw punches and combinations. It's as if he didn't know Fonfara's fight style at the beginning of the fight. You want another example? Could he have been prepared worse for his fight against Sergio Martinez? How many of the early rounds did Sergio Martinez win? Let me give them to you. The first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. I need another hand, folks. The sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth, the 10th, the 11th. Right? This is a guy whose preparation should be viewed, in my opinion, with suspicion based on his past inability to be devoted for big fights. Right? So now I'm hearing his weight's right on time. No doubt Angel Heredia is going to help him lose the water weight to get to 164.5 and then gain weight after the weigh-in. Right? So that when he comes in the ring, he has a noticeable size advantage. Noticeable size advantage on Canelo. You know what? I don't care about that size advantage. People need to understand that sometimes being the bigger man or the taller man in the ring is a disadvantage. Right? How many shorter champions does boxing need to have before it realizes that you can be a shorter man and still be one hell of a fighter? Folks, think about it. We just saw Canelo against Liam Smith. Let's hope Liam Smith today is able to eat solid foods. Could Canelo have done a better job on that young man's midsection? Canelo takes out his body. Takes it out. Right? Liam Smith gets knocked down at one point in that fight off a body shot. Right? He's on the canvas. He's in pain. You feel the pain. Right? You feel the pain. Now you're telling me that Chavez Jr., as tall as he is, with as big of a midsection as he has, fighting his father's fight style. Let's face it, he always tries to get up on you. He always tries to get in close, right? Gives away his height. You're telling me that with that much of a midsection against a huge body puncher who just happens to be one of the hardest punchers pound for pound in the entire sport of boxing. You're telling me when Canelo sees Chavez Jr.'s midsection, he's not going to think that it's Christmas? Folks, understand, if Chavez Jr. is going to make size an issue, he's going to have to come deep in the pocket, isn't he? How did that work out for James Kirkland against Canelo? Right? This version of Canelo, at this point in his career, feasts on fighters who try to come deep in the pocket against him. Look at Liam Smith. Liam Smith, to his credit, tried to go toe-to-toe with Canelo. How did that work out? I believe you can beat Canelo, but you've got to be a fighter who uses the entire ring. You have to have hand speed. You have to be able to work off length. Which part of that skill set does Chavez Jr. have? Right? And so, the way I see this fight, and I'm aware that Canelo's 5'7.5". The way I see this fight is, if Canelo comes in low, he's already shorter than Chavez Jr. Right? Chavez Jr. in his prime was a hellacious body puncher, especially with that left hand. But can Canelo come in low and hide his body? Can he? Let me say this too. You're fighting a guy who is fighting outside of his weight range. Right? Chavez Jr. hasn't been 164.5 for a while. Right? Isn't that exactly the kind of fighter who's going to have problems taking punches? I don't care how much food he eats after the weigh-in. Right? Just think about your own life. When you're lighter than you've been in years. Right? Lighter than you've been in years. Do you believe that's the time when you're able to take punches to the midsection better than you would with that extra layer of fat around your midsection, that extra layer of protection? So, you've had some people come out and publicly say what I believe should be painfully obvious. Even Nacho Beristain's prime protege, Juan Manuel Marquez, thinks that Canelo should win this fight. A shorter man who knew how to go to the body like Canelo, Roberto Duran, believes the fight's a mismatch. He believes Canelo should win this fight. Felix Trinidad believes Canelo should win the fight inside of the distance, as do I. Right? Let's face it, Chavez Jr. didn't go the distance against Fonfara. Right? Abel Sanchez, Golovkin's trainer, says that he believes Canelo should win, but expects, in his words, Chavez Jr. to scare him. Right? Now, I'll concede if Chavez Jr. comes in the first, let's say, 3 rounds of the fight, and just starts winging punches and tries to get in close, all right. Chavez Jr. has, in my opinion, 9 to 12 minutes to make a statement. After that, I'm expecting him to get wiped out. Amir Khan, who's been in the ring with Saul Alvarez, is picking Saul Alvarez. Right? So, put me among those who believes this is a mismatch. I know I'm someone who's been critical of Canelo here online. I believe Canelo has lost some fights I've seen. The Austin Trout fight. I'll concede he's the guy who gets the knockdown on Austin Trout. But I thought Trout should have won that fight on the scorecard. Look at the CompuBox numbers. Right? I believe Canelo lost the Miguel Cotto fight. As does Nacho Beristain. But understand, Cotto has much better legs. Much better legs than Chavez Jr. Right? Cotto can use the whole ring when he wants. Look at the Delvin Rodriguez fight. Look at the Canelo fight. Right? I believe Nacho Beristain saw that fight, saw that Cotto was having some success with that left hook, knew that Chavez Jr. has a left hook, and knew that Chavez Jr. was bigger than Miguel Cotto. The difference, though, is Cotto today is still a world-class fighter. Cotto today was able to go up to middleweight, win the middleweight title, beat some middleweights. Right? Cotto's still world-class. Chavez Jr. today is well past his prime. Right? Well past his prime. He's looked terrible in recent fights. He doesn't have the timing he once did. This isn't the fighter who beat John Duddy. This isn't the fighter, Alexa off. This isn't the fighter who beat Andy Lee. So, I'm not buying the hype. You're going to see interviews as we get closer to this fight of people involved in the fight, Nacho Beristain and stuff like that. These guys are going to continue to show up on shows, right? Canelo was on a show with Chavez Jr. and they made a bet, winner take all and stuff like that, right? You're going to hear Chavez Jr., you're going to look at the body language and you're going to think to yourself, oh wow, he's confident. You might see the guys looking at each other face to face and you might say, wow, Chavez Jr. is so much bigger than Canelo. Right? Boxing's a sport with weight classes. He can be bigger than Canelo. Is he going to be the better fighter at 164.5? Also, let's be real on Canelo. Canelo is big for even a middleweight. Don't buy the hype that Canelo isn't really a real middleweight, that Oscar De La Hoya's been pushing. Right? Don't buy that at all. Canelo walks around, right, in the 170s. So, as you look at the guys facing each other, there's a height gap. But don't fool yourself, right? Canelo's beefy. Canelo's not a small man. He's a shorter man. That doesn't make him the smaller man. So, I think it's a mismatch. I'm expecting Canelo to make a statement. I can tell you, I watched the Canelo-Shane Mosley fight a few years ago. He hit Mosley so many times in the ribs, my ribs hurt watching that fight. Right? I was literally feeling my ribs watching the fight. Right? If a guy is going to try to come inside on Canelo and engage in trench warfare, just understand he's coming inside on one of the better body punchers, one of the harder body punchers in the sport of boxing. How sure are you that Chavez Jr. is going to be able to find Canelo as well as Canelo is going to be able to find him? I give Chavez Jr. 9 to 12 minutes, 3 to 4 rounds to do something big. right? He's going to have to really hurt Canelo. Really hurt Canelo. You're going to have to see Canelo on the canvas. You're going to have to see Canelo's head bouncing backwards off the ropes. You're going to have to see Canelo trying desperately to hold on, right? If Chavez Jr. doesn't severely hurt Canelo in the first 4 rounds, this fight is over. It's going to be a young lion in his prime against a guy reaching back, trying to find his prime. I still like Canelo. Nothing I've heard in this media circus has convinced me otherwise. Look, I got the utmost respect for Erislandy Lara. I believe Mikey Garcia is one of the best fighters in the sport, pound for pound. Carlos Cuadras proved to me he belongs in the ring with Roman Gonzalez. Right? I just believe all of those guys are wrong. I like Canelo in this fight. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.